you. Thank you so much. Candy and I are delighted to be with you. I want to thank Mike and Candace and everybody, all the volunteers, everybody who's been involved with helping to put this evening together. You know, I would, a few years ago, never have imagined that I would be running for president of the United States. But, you know, everything kind of changed when I spoke at the prayer breakfast in 2013. That really shook things up. And, you know, I was very suspicious when I got that invitation. I said, Lord, what are you up to? Because I had spoken at the prayer breakfast in 1997, and I wasn't aware that anybody ever did it twice. And then I investigated and found out that one person had done it twice, and that was Billy Graham. I said, wow, I know you're up to something there. But, you know, I didn't know what I was going to say. And, you know, it caused no end of consternation for the organizers, for the White House, because they wanted my transcript. They wanted to see what I was going to say. They kept saying, you're not going to say anything that will offend the president. I said, well, I have no intention of offending anyone. Well, I didn't know what I was going to say until the day of the prayer breakfast. And then it was crystal clear to me what I was supposed to say. And it obviously just resonated with millions of people across this nation. And, you know, people started clamoring. They started saying, you should run for president, which I thought was kind of a silly idea. And I said, that'll all go away. Just continue with your plans to retire, to relax, to learn how to play the organ, to become a good golfer, to read all those books that you have been saving for the last few years so you could read when you retire, and to watch all the movies you never saw, and people are always shocked that you never saw. And it was just going to be wonderful. And I said it'll all die down, but it didn't die down. And it kept building and building. And I started wondering. I said, Lord, is this something you really want me to do? I said, this just does not seem like the right thing, although I must admit that I had been wondering for a couple of years why so many things had happened in my life. Why did I end up on the Kellogg board, Costco board, get involved with a national nonprofit, and have all of these experiences and get to know all these people and have so many experiences building things. And I started to wonder if maybe he did want me to do it. But, you know, all the pundits said, absolutely not. No way in the world. No one like you has ever been able to do this. You can't put together a national organization. You can't raise the funding. It is an absurd idea. Sit down and shut up. And honestly, when they said that, I said, phew, this is great. I was kind of happy to hear that, quite frankly. But then I said, Lord, I'll tell you what, all the pundits say it's impossible. So if you want me to do it, you can make it very clear by simply opening the doors. And if you open the doors, I will walk through. And if you close the doors, I will gladly sit down. And he began to open the doors. And we put together an incredible organization, all the right people, all the right times. It was clearly orchestrated at a different level. And some of you may remember the Washington Post piece a few months ago saying, Carson's key people have left, the whole thing is falling apart, we told you this would happen. I ran into that Washington Post reporter about 3 weeks ago. And he said, you know what, I was dead wrong, I am so sorry, I was way off the mark. And if you need anybody to write anything, call me. I will write anything you want. But it was pretty amazing And then, as far as the funding was concerned, it is against my principles to go and get in bed with a bunch of special interest groups or to lick the boots of billionaires who want to control things. I simply won't do that. And what happened is that people, ordinary people, started getting involved. And we've had over 550,000 donations by ordinary people. And it has provided what's necessary to run a national campaign, because the pundits forgot about one important component of America: the people. That's what they forgot about. And really, that's what this is all about, as far as I'm concerned. It's about returning the power to the people. The government has taken over our lives. And that is really the reason that I was such a vociferous opponent of the so-called Affordable Care Act. It wasn't because it's not affordable, and it wasn't because it doesn't work. It was because it is antithetical to the principles of the founding of America. You see, we're supposed to live in a country that is of, for, and by the people. The government is supposed to be there only to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With the Affordable Care Act, the government comes along and says, this is what we're doing. We don't care what you think. We're shoving it down your throat, and if you don't like it, too bad. Well, that is not the America that was designed by our founders. And if we will accept that, if we will accept the government taking control of the most important thing we have, which is our health and our health care, then we will accept anything. And that's why we must rise up as the people and not allow the government to control our lives. This is not what we think. We live in such an amazing nation. We are so lucky to be here. I've traveled to 57 different countries, and I am always delighted to be back home, because there's no place that's quite like this. And really, it doesn't even matter if you're born in horrible circumstances. My mother was one of 24 children, got married when she was 13, trying to escape the horrible poverty in rural Tennessee. She was only able to cobble together up to a third grade education. And she and my father ended up moving to Detroit. Years later, she discovered he was a bigamist. That resulted in a divorce. We ended up moving to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multi-family dwelling, boarded up windows and doors, sirens, gangs, murders, rats, roaches. The roaches were really quite impressive. In the more upscale areas, they call them water bugs, but we knew what they were. Not only would they crawl on your table, they would crawl in your cereal box. So if you were eating Raisin Bran, you had to know what those brown things were. I shouldn't say that after 18 years on the Kellogg board. But and those rats, first time I saw one, I thought it was a dog. These things could leap like 5 feet in the air. And then I saw people lying on the ground with bullet holes, waiting to die. Both of my older cousins, who we adored, were killed. And it was something you got used to seeing it. It's one of the reasons that I never thought that I would live to be beyond 25 years of age. But my mother, she worked so hard. And I never really realize what she must have been going through until a few weeks ago when I was in Ferguson, Missouri. And I was talking to members of the community. And one of the mothers was telling me how frightened she was every single day that her sons wouldn't come back home when they went out. And I'm sure my mother must have had those same feelings while she was working so hard, 2, 3 jobs at a time, feeding people's homes. She didn't want to be on welfare. And she was largely able to stay off of welfare. And she was very thrifty. She saved every dime, every nickel, tried to stretch it to give us quality of life. And I hated poverty. I just was sure I was born to the wrong family. I just didn't like poverty. Some people seem to be as happy with it as a pig in slop, but I just did not like it. And I remember there was never money to do anything. We used to have, a teacher would say, bring a nickel to school tomorrow because we're going to have popcorn balls. They cost a nickel. Some kids would bring a dime or a quarter or even $1 to buy a whole bag of them. I never had a popcorn ball. You know, sometimes we could get into the state fair free of charge because you could get one of the special coupons in the paper that would let you in free. But there were no coupons so that you could ride the rides. Never rode any of those rides or went into the fun house or any of that stuff. Bought any caramel candy. Never tasted cotton candy until I was an adult, and it wasn't that good. Everything seems great, you know, when you can't have it. But you know, my mother did everything she could to try to make it nice for us. I remember for my 14th birthday, I wanted a bike. I wanted a bike so bad. She said, no, we can't afford a bike. But unbeknownst to me, she was putting away a little bit of money every month. Had a bike in a layaway. And on my 14th birthday in the garage was a bike. I was so happy. And she just sacrificed so much just to try to make life better for us. And for our own sons, I used to tell them as they were growing up that they were much more disadvantaged than I was. Because they grew up in the lap of luxury. Never had need for anything, never had want for anything. Traveled all over the world, met everybody, did everything. And we realized that that was a disadvantage. So Candy and I created artificial hardship in their life. Just to toughen them up, you know, so that they could make it in the world. And it worked. And, you know, they're all very successful, doing very well in life. But it is important that we think about those kinds of things. But the thing that probably helped me the most was the fact that my mother recognized that my poor performance in school would have a terrible impact in the long run. I was perhaps the worst student that you've ever seen. But it was the reading. She turned off the TV and made us read books after praying to God for wisdom. That's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just have to have faith. And he gave her the right message. My brother and I weren't that happy about the message. I mean, turning off the TV and making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library every week and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And, you know, she would put check marks and highlights, and we would think she was reading what she wasn't. But, you know, it did wonders for me. And as I started reading books, particularly about people of accomplishment, I stopped hating poverty. Because I began to realize the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. And it's the choices that you make. And it's the energy that you put behind those choices that determine your life. It's not just the people around you or the environment that determines your life. And God has given us a great deal of leeway if we actually utilize those brains. And, I started reading everything I could get my hands on. It got to the point where my mother would say, Benjamin, put the book down and eat your food. I was always reading. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. Much to the consternation of all those students who used to laugh and call me dummy, who were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I would say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious. But it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, there is a reason that God gave us these brains. They're amazing organ systems with these gigantic frontal lobes. And if you look at a human brain, you'll see the frontal lobes are much bigger than other animals. Why? Because that's where you engage in rational thought processing. We have the ability to extract information from the past, take information from the present, integrate it, and project it as a plan into the future. Which means we can plan and strategize. We don't have to simply react to what is going on. And that is essential to the well-being of our nation. See, right now, if you look at the electric grid of this nation, it is in woeful condition. And all it would take is the right kind of cyber attack or, some type of a solar flare, EMP, electromagnetic pulse, a nuclear weapon exploded in our exo-atmosphere, and our grid is gone. And we're not back 40 years. And it would leave us extremely vulnerable to cyber attacks, to dirty bombs, to a whole host of things. There would be absolute chaos and pandemonium overnight. That doesn't have to happen if we use those frontal lobes. And we start thinking that we need to harden that grid. We need a public-private partnership. And we need to harden our grids across the nation. And we need to have 2 or 3 levels of alternative electrical power in our nation. We need to begin to take advantage of hydroelectric power. We sit between 2 oceans. Can you imagine the amount of power that is available there? We need to use the natural resources that God has given us in terms of oil and natural gas. And we need to get rid of the exportation rules that were placed in the 70s when we had an energy shortage. And we need to use all of that energy to drive down our national debt. Because you have to understand what that national debt is doing to our nation. Over 18 trillion dollars. Can you even conceive of what that means? We can say that number, but if you tried to pay it back at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year, it would take you more than 5,000 years. And that is what we are putting on the backs of our young people. But what does that do to us, having that kind of debt? Well, it forces the Fed to suppress the interest rate. Because the debt service at almost zero is still $250 billion a year. Can you imagine what would happen if we let the interest rates rise to normal levels? You'd be approaching $1 trillion. We don't have that kind of money. Well, here's the problem with chronic suppression of the interest rate. Joe, the butcher, every Friday used to go to the bank and put 5% of his earnings in the bank and watch it grow over 20 or 30 years. And when he was ready to retire, he had a nice nest egg and he was able to retire in comfort. There is no incentive for Joe to save now, and people are not saving. It is a huge problem for our country. When poor people and middle class people have no mechanism for making money in terms of the banks, in terms of the bond market, in terms of anything, it's all gone. The only people who can make money are people who have risk tolerance. So that would be upper income people who can play the stock market. This is not America. And you have the Bernie Sanders of the world trying to use that to stir up class warfare and say that it's because rich people have money and that's why poor people are having a problem. No, it's because of the asinine policies that have led to this level of debt. That's part one. The other thing that is killing the middle class and the poor people in this country are regulations. And you say, how are regulations killing? Every single regulation costs money. It's like a tax in terms of goods and services. It adds to it. You know, I remember sitting around the boardroom table at Kellogg and at Costco, and we would be talking about the effects of new regulations. Dodd-Frank, for example. And how many people would we have to hire in order to comply with that? And what new divisions or departments would we have to put in place in order to comply with that? And it costs a lot of money. And guess where the money comes from? Your next box of cornflakes. That's where it comes from. But you see, those prices, that tax, has to be paid by all the consumers. But who is hit most by that? Poor people and the middle class. Another thing that's driving the income of that. Now, do you think the left-wing progressives will ever tell the people what is actually going on? Of course not. They will simply try to blame the rich. Let me tell you what the real problem is. That's not even the real problem. The real problem is the fiscal gap, the unfunded liabilities that our government owes. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the agencies. Do you know there are 645 government agencies and sub-agencies, all of whom have a budget, all of whom have programs? This is a lot of money we're talking about. Versus the amount of money that the government plans to take in from taxes and other revenue sources. Those two numbers should be virtually identical. And when they're not, you have a gap. You bring it forward to today's dollars, that's what's known as the fiscal gap. No politicians will talk about the fiscal gap. It's too frightening and they want to be reelected. But I'm not a politician, so I can talk about the fiscal gap. Currently, it sits at over $200 trillion. So if somebody wrote us a check today for $18 trillion and said your national debt is paid off, we would still be in huge trouble. Now, the only reason we can sustain that level of debt is because we can print money. We are what's known as the reserve currency, a position that generally goes with the world's #1 economy, which we have been since the 1870s until last year. Now we're in competition with China for that title. It looks like they may come out on top. Would they like to be the reserve currency? Would they like to print money? Oh boy, they think they could get out of their woes pretty quickly if they could. But you know what? It's not a blessing because we decoupled the dollar from the gold standard in 1971. Since that time, we've been printing money on the basis of our good name, faith, and credit, which is not all that good, quite frankly. If all of a sudden we can't print money, and that day is on the way, there are many other countries in the world that don't think we should be the reserve currency. And if we clearly lose our #1 spot, that pressure will increase. If we money tomorrow, the collapse of this economy would be unbelievable. What happened on Wall Street in 1929? A walk in the park compared to what will happen in this country. And what that means is we have got to get our act together. We have got to stop raising the debt. We certainly shouldn't be talking about raising the debt ceiling. And when somebody comes along and says something like free college for everybody, we ought to say, what planet did you come from? What are you talking about? You're just accelerating the financial collapse of our nation. And you know what? If I were in charge and I was trying to destroy America, you know what I would do? I would try to drive wedges between all the people. I would have a war on women, and race wars, and income wars, and religious wars, and age wars, and I would have a war on everything. And I would have Democrats hating Republicans and Republicans hating Democrats, and I would make us all think that if somebody didn't agree with them, that was your mortal enemy to be destroyed, to destroy their employment. And then I would raise the debt to unsustainable levels. I would just bring people in here from other countries and try to give them all kinds of benefits. I would be putting everybody on food stamps that I could possibly get on food stamps. I would be giving people free phones and telling them they could have free college tuition. And I would try to destroy the military. I would have the smallest Navy since 1917, which we, by the way, have, and the smallest Air Force since 1940, which we, by the way, have. And I would create disdain, and that morale would be so low that our generals would retire, and the sequester would cause lieutenant colonels and captains and majors to leave because they would be told not to re-enlist next year. Now that's what I would do. Any resemblance to what's going on is just coincidental, I'm sure. But it gives you some idea of what we are up against in this country and why we must awaken the population, and we must do it quickly. And there is a role that each person here can play in that process, because you all have a sphere of influence. And there were 93 million people who didn't vote in 2012, 30 million evangelicals that didn't vote. You know some of those people. And I'm asking people across the country to do that. If we activate the citizenry, that's what will gain control of our nation once again. The people are supposed to be at the pinnacle. They are supposed to set the agenda through their representatives. And yet, our government has gone off track. Our representatives, the Congress, have become spineless. And the separation of powers that was supposed to occur is not working appropriately. The executive branch and the judiciary branch have gone off the deep end because there is no legislative branch to check them. All of these are things that we must rectify. And we're going to have a big wave election in 2016. Not only obtaining the presidency, but with long coattails so that we have a filibuster-proof Senate and so that we have everything that we need in Congress. And I believe by the grace of God that this is going to happen because I see it across this nation. People are waking up in droves and they are stopped listening to the pundits and to the political experts. They're not listening to them. They're not listening to the silly media and all the stupid stuff that they are bringing up. And that is going to be our salvation. And here's what I think once we get in control. And when I say we, I'm talking about people with common sense. I don't care what party they belong to. People with common sense. Because honestly, I think all of this Democrat and Republican stuff is silly. What we need to be talking about, what is pro-American and what is anti-American. Because, when we continue down this pathway, when the house of cards collapses and our economy goes down, it will go down for everybody, not just Democrats or Republicans. And if we don't take a leadership role in the world, when the global jihadists get here, they're not going to ask you whether you're a Democrat or a Republican before they cut your head off. So we have got to stop that and recognize that our strength is in our unity. The enemies are those people who are trying to divide us up. We're not each other's enemies. And if we can get that through our heads and stop being manipulated, we, the people, will take our nation back. And it was Thomas Jefferson, who I believe was a genius, who said that the American people would become less vigilant. They would stop paying attention, and the government would grow and insinuate itself into every aspect of their lives and would take control of their lives. But just before we turn to another form of government, the American people would awaken, and they would do what was necessary to take back their government. And I say this is the time for us to do it. Now, we are going to have time for a couple of comments.
So before the comments, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Carson, and I approve this message.
Okay. This young man, Andrew, has a microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand so he can bring the microphone to you.
Tell me how you persuaded Candy to get into this with you.
Well, that was a difficult chore. Candy was not interested in doing this, and until we had 2 granddaughters. And that changed her mind because she recognized that they would have no future. And I must admit that, I would love to be doing something else, to be honest with you. But I'm not sure that I could actually be comfortable doing something else, knowing that our country was going down the tubes. And I believe that God always prepares you for what he wants you to do. And he puts what you need before you. He never asks you to do what he doesn't provide for. And he's providing, so we'll just continue to do it.
Carson, first, many prayers to you and your family. I'm from Georgia. My mother told me before I came here, she said, Dr. Carson is here for 2 reasons. Number 1, God put him here, and he will run the country. And number 2, God put a decision in front of the United States of America. And we have to make the choice, one way or the other.
Absolutely.
And that is upon us. What I ask you is, obviously, Donald Trump, in my opinion, inflated, egotistic, he's going to blow up on his own. But he raises good points. As you lead the country right now, as you lead us, as you bring us to hopefully the prayer that we're praying, What are the 3 to 5 things you would do to change the country? What is it that you're going to do to change the problems we have?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to call for a joint session of Congress, and I'm going to make it clear to them that we in the government work for the people don't work for us, and that we want to reestablish the people at the pinnacle of what we're doing. Number 2, I want to strengthen our military. If we don't get the military right, nothing else matters, and that's absolutely essential. And that includes all aspects of our security. So that would also include all of our borders, and I think we can secure all of our borders in less than a year. We have the ability, we just don't have the will to do it. And then the third thing is I would make it very clear that we're going to start very quickly getting our fiscal house in order by letting Congress know that I would not be signing any increases in the federal budget for the next 2 to 3 years, or maybe 4 years. By doing that, just that one simple maneuver will establish us as no longer creating additions, and it will balance the budget. And that's what we need to do. We cannot continue to accumulate debt in this country. And I would also make it clear that we're not going to be hiring anybody else. We already have 4.1 million federal employees, and thousands of them retire each year. I would not replace them. We can shift people around. I would call in the heads of all of those 645 agencies and sub-agencies and say, you have to reduce your budget by 3 to 4% by this time next year. And if you can't do it, give me your resignation right now, because you're going to be fired. And I would do that the following year and the following year also. And that would get us down to a reasonable level, and it's not discriminating. That's different than utilizing our resources to spiff up our military. So those are the kinds of things immediately. There's about a list of 10 things that have to be done in very rapid succession because we're in a lot of trouble. Yes? Couldn't hear you. Oh, Veterans Administration. You know, the veterans in our country, there are 22 to 23 of them that commit suicide every day. And that's got to be the tip of the iceberg that tells you what a horrible situation that they are in. And what I would advocate is that the day that they join, that they be enrolled in a support program. See, we give them support after their discharge. They need to have support the day that they enroll. It should continue throughout their entire military career. And a year before their discharge, we should have people working on their reintegration back into society. And in addition to that, they should all have access to a health savings account, which allows them to go to any hospital and any clinic in the country that they want to go to, and we should be honored to take care of it. Anybody who prefers to get their care at the Veterans Administration, they certainly can. We wouldn't stop them from being able to do that. But we really need to be concerned about the fact that we have a 14% drop in applications for our volunteer army. That's going to affect us in a very significant way. I don't want us to get to a point where we have to reinstitute the draft. And I think what we really have to do is just start taking care of our people, and I think we'll have plenty of volunteers to do what we need to be done in this country. And the last question.
Sorry, sir. Dr. Carson, how does your faith impact your political decisions?
Okay. Well, you know, everybody's faith impacts every decision that they have. Some people just won't acknowledge that. Even if you're an atheist, it affects the way that you relate to other people and what you do. My faith is very strong. I talk to a group. I talk to him. Before I do anything, I talk to him because he is the source of all wisdom. And that's the way I believe he talks to me, by giving me wisdom. He may talk to other people in different ways, but I just want you to know that I think God has a sense of humor because, ever since I was 14 and I almost stabbed somebody, since that day I started reading from the book of Proverbs every day. And the book of Proverbs was written by Solomon. So my middle name happens to be Solomon. So God knew that was going to happen. So he came my parents to give me that name. But do you remember what Solomon's first great feat was that brought him great fame when he became the king of Israel? 2 women claimed to be the mother of the same baby. Yeah. What did he advocate? Divide the baby. Well, that's when I became very well known, when I divided babies too. So I think God has a sense of humor.